This is Rebuilders, the leaders we need for the decade ahead. Here's your host, Paul Shoemaker.
This is kind of a unique, different episode of Rebuilders, and frankly, a pretty special one to me. When I decided to do a launch event to kick off the book on March 15th, because that was the publish date, I thought of two people I wanted to have in that conversation, Michael McAfee and Rosanne Haggerty, who were two of the people in the book, and just world-class leaders, world-class rebuilders. Rosanne is the first of the 38 rebuilders in the book that show up, and Michael starts on page 72. What they are is they are incredible exemplars of two of the 5 vital traits: generosity mindset and 24/7 authenticity. So we did the March 15 event, and I went back and I listened to it just to sort of capture some things. And there was just so much good, rich conversation that it only made sense to turn this into a conversation that I could share with more people. So we will start off with each of them just taking a minute to introduce their organization, so you sort of have a grounding in who they are. And then I'm going to ask them how they think about and they define generosity mindset and 24/7 authenticity for themselves. And then we'll go from there.
Michael McAfee is the CEO of PolicyLink. Rosanne is the CEO of Community Solutions. Thank you both again so much for being here. Well, Michael first, and then Rosanne, would you just take a moment and explain, just give us a quick overview what PolicyLink is, so folks on the call that don't know you know what PolicyLink is about?
Yes. Thank you for having me, Paul and Rosanne. It's good to be with you. PolicyLink is a research and action organization. It is a think tank. It is a think tank that grounds its work in thinking about how to create a just and fair society. And we do that by listening to the voice and the wisdom and the experience of folks in community, especially people of color, translating what is working in community into public policy. And so practically with President Obama, when we had that administration, we were able to design programs like Promised Neighborhoods, the Healthy Food Financing Initiative. Those programs started in communities like the Harlem Children's Zone or Philadelphia, and were translated into public policy. So our job is to design a world that is just and fair for the more than 100 million folks in America right now who are being left behind.
Thank you. Rosanne?
Paul, thank you so much for including me, and always wonderful to be with Michael. Community Solutions works toward a lasting end to homelessness that leaves no one behind. And the way we do that is work with now more than 80 communities, largely county regions across the country, to help them build the infrastructure to solve homelessness all the way through for everyone, and to essentially knit together all of the different actors and intentions in a community around that shared measurable aim of getting to an end state where homelessness is rare, brief when it happens. Essentially, it's a public health kind of mindset where you have to solve for the whole population. It's beyond just important and good programs, but a really comprehensive view of what change looks like, especially for the most vulnerable.
Rosanne, let me start with you. I still remember talking to you close to a year ago about the book. And I believe you were walking down the street in New York City, typically in a hurry from one place to another. And I asked you what one of the most important leadership beliefs is to succeed in the hard work that you do. And you said a generosity mindset. And that word just sort of like stuck. A, it surprised me, and B, it really stuck with me. So what does generosity mindset mean in your work, and why is it so important?
Well, I think as your whole book and your intention, Paul, illustrates, the nature of the problems we face are not solved by one group. They're not solved in one space. It really requires a different level of thinking, a different way of seeing, frankly, that we have to reconnect all of these different interests and activities, or if we're going to have a chance of a vital and equitable society. And so our work is really premised on this notion that communities are places of abundance as well as challenge, that it's really the desire of people across communities, certainly working in the space of homelessness, to see this problem solved, to provide structure and tools to make that shift happen. Actually, I appreciate all five of your insights, but this idea that no one sector owns the solution to these complex problems is very much at the heart of our work. And so, over many years, we've evolved with community partners a process for helping to kind of knit together the pieces into a whole around this issue. But what we find is the practices around collaboration, data-driven problem solving, training frontline workers in the kinds of problem-solving tools that typically they weren't introduced to help them manage complexity and deal with a complex shifting problem, that people are hungry for this, and that it basically starts from the premise of we've got to get above the interests of our own organization to think in terms of the common good, to really find solutions that work for everyone, especially those who are most needy of the right designed systems, as Michael will say.
Mr. McAfee, when you and I talked about the book, you have had a handful of formative experiences along your career journey that helped shape you and sort of challenge your authenticity as a leader. Would you share one or two of those with us and just how it shaped you as a leader?
But I didn't know how to sniff out money and power. So I opened up the Cranes magazine in Kansas City, and my eyes were drawn to a Jesuit priest named Father Thomas Savage, who was the president of Rockhurst College. I called him up, asked him if he would serve on my board. He said yes. He took me under his wing. He introduced me to the civic elites in Kansas City. And overnight, I went from poverty to being a star because of my proximity to money and power at the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation. That was my first job in the sector. And it was a wonderful opportunity until about 5 years in. I moved really quickly through the foundation. Most people don't start their careers, at least back then, they did not start their careers in their 20s. They usually came after having accomplished some things out in the world. So by virtue of just being so green, it was a big opportunity. In that opportunity, I got to see how civic leaders, Don and Adele Hall, the owners of Hallmark Cards, and Bill Esri, who was the CEO of Sprint at that time, how they thought about community and built community because they were always at the foundation with some initiative. Watching them sell the Kansas City Royals to the Community Foundation, which took our assets to over $1 billion. It was like this radically transformative time. Well, I decided I wanted to go run an initiative that the foundation had started but had gotten disillusioned in the CEO. And they loaned me out. And when they loaned me out, overnight, I went from a star to an angry Black man. My pushing, my trying to create, this is the time that Karen Pittman and others are creating the youth development field. And I asked one question: would you put your children or grandchildren in programs that performed like the ones that I was seeing in Kansas City? And that question and my persistence in pushing it caused them to send me to anger management. And I talked to a woman named Dr. Dottie Fannensteel for a year. And ultimately, they fired me and I had to leave Kansas City. And I moved to the East Coast. But in that moment, it was one of the scariest moments of my life because being that close to money and power, I realized the world is very small and you can't run away from folks. And I was afraid that I would no longer be able to live my vocation. I had finally gotten a sense of it in this role. And the thing that it taught me was, who do I serve? And am I willing to pay the consequence? Here it is. I'm not 30. I'm making $100,000 in the early 90s in Kansas City, Missouri, and that's pretty good money. And all I had to do, as James Baldwin say, the price of the ticket, all I needed to do was be quiet. Be that face that could write, who could talk and could present. But when I started trying to get results, I realized, one, that I can be right and wrong at the same time. I was absolutely right in what I was pushing, didn't have the savvy to know how to survive it. And the gift that it gave me, though, was it helped me understand who do I choose to serve in my career. Most people don't get that privilege and that insight.
I'll assume by now, if you've been listening for 7 or 8 minutes, you get why I feel so strongly about these two. And the next question or two, I'm just going to start to broaden the conversation about how they show up as leaders in the world and the traits they exemplify. So just keep listening and keep enjoying the same breadth and depth of brain and heart these two bring to their work.
Keep going on generosity mindset a little bit. It can seem almost sort of quaint and irrelevant, especially given how divided and siloed we are right now. So if you're talking to somebody, not just within the context of community solutions work, but sort of out in the community, how would you tell them this isn't just a sort of like naive, nice sounding concept, but it's actually a strategic approach that we have to have in communities if we're going to solve problems? What about a generosity mindset makes the difference?
Might be best for me just to tell you what this generosity mindset looks like in action. Just like three recent examples. Mary Simon, an amazing woman, very soft-spoken, not someone who would strike you as the fierce organizer and confident problem solver that she is, runs the team across the whole Gulf Coast of Mississippi. So big sprawling area of marshlands and small cities along the Gulf Coast. They may well be the first community in the country to just end homelessness altogether. They have ended chronic and veteran homelessness. They're well on their way to just zero period. But Mary has a vision for what it's going to look like to sustain zero. And just in even a call this afternoon, she's lined up the county, support from the state, support from the local business community, some support from us and our partners, a local property owner. She's putting together this coordinated entry center to be kind of the lock and key on getting to zero. And she's pulling resources from everywhere in one of the poorest communities in the country. So like that's, one example. And just about 6 weeks ago, we closed on a project in Santa Fe. I helped the city of Santa Fe purchase an extended stay motel as permanent housing for those experiencing chronic homelessness in the community, as well as some of the lower income workers in the community also in desperate need of housing. That came together because of the fierce commitment of the mayor and his team in the midst of like downsized staff, given budget cuts, so many demands on their time. But a local community foundation, the state, the New Mexico Coalition to End Homelessness, another organization that's providing the services and the management on site. I mean, all of these things that look impossible, that they're getting figured out because of people stepping out of like, what's just good for me? I mean, it's basically, you can't worry about attribution and who gets credit when things need to get done. And so all over the country, we are finding these teams of folks who are willing to step up and just get better and better at sharing what needs to be done. So,
Michael, I think the way I define 24/7 authenticity, meeting that bar in 2021 is a really high bar. You talked about the proximity to power and money. So how do you make sure your leadership principles stay grounded and authentic?
I stay grounded and authentic because I keep the who I serve centered in all of my work. And that's my own personal standard of accountability. That 100 million living at 200% of poverty, that was my own personal charge to come to Policy Link and say, okay, we have this amazing platform. How do I do more with the platform? So it started with being my own personal number, if you will. And now it's our organizational number. And so when I'm in the rooms, whether I'm in the White House or the community or a boardroom somewhere, I'm there to do work in service of that number. I'm not there to get another job. I'm not there to make more money. I'm not there to, get all the accolades that can come with our roles. I'm there to do work. And so for me, the way I stay grounded is I try to only get engaged in stuff that is results-based. You can spend your whole time flying around the country and talking and writing and doing all these amazing things. But the real question is, can you answer one simple question? Is anyone really better off? And for me, that better off can't just be one person now. It has to be entire populations. And so that's what keeps me grounded. But it also bridges into what Rosanne is saying. I can't do that by myself. Even though I get tired of collaboration because it's so hard. It's my job to do it and to figure out how to do it well. So for me, holding the interest of that entire population keeps me grounded. And then the last thing I'll say is, much like the memory of what happened in Kansas City keeps me grounded. In 2012, when I had just started at PolicyLink, I was coming up out of the Penn Station in Baltimore, and I had to sit down for a moment because I was winded. I was like, I know I'm in shape. What is wrong? Staying in DC for the weekend, I'm going to go to the Minute Clinic and just get like a Z-Pack or something and try to clear things up. Fortunately, the line was too long. And I was talking to my mother. I don't know why I listened to her this time, but I did. She said, why don't you go to the hospital and get checked out? One blood clot will kill you. But I had started traveling about 60% of the time, and I had multiple blood clots that had broken up in both of my lungs. I'm not in any pain, but I'm sitting in the hospital having one of those moments again where I am really happy because while I'm not ready to check out, I'm like, I'm actually doing the work I'm supposed to do. And so you go from your young career to mid-career, and you get these moments where you get to really see. And what I'm sitting there saying is, God, can I have more time to finish what I'm doing? Not like, God, I need more time so I can finally act right and do the work that I'm supposed to do. And so those gifts I carry with me because those are insights that I treasure. And so that's why I fight hard for the 100 million, because I've had 2 glimpses now to see if I really believe all the stuff that I'm talking.
For the last 14 minutes coming up, sometimes you're interviewing someone and they're just great, and you want to ask a question or two and get out of the way. So that's what I did. I asked them sort of a more expansive question. And then I also asked them why we need particular kinds of leaders that they are each attuned to make America stronger in the 2020s and the decade ahead. I think you'll love their answers. And then I close with sort of a simpler question about who their role models are. Their answers are different. They're both pretty poignant and just say something about who each of them is and how grounded they are in who they are as a leader. Certainly something for all of us to learn from.
I hope folks watching and listening are hearing generosity and authenticity. Rosanne, one of the most powerful things you really focused me on as I was writing the book, and you sent me to some people that I never would have known, I never would have found. I talked to them. They're in the book. They're on the ground. They're in communities. They don't have big titles. They don't have, big wild visions. They don't sit atop large organizations. And yet somebody like you trying to solve a big, hairy, challenging problem like homelessness tells me that kind of leader is just as important. So why are those people just as so important today? And why will they be important in the years ahead? Not just the folks with the titles and the folks at the top of the organizations.
Well, big systems are made up of really solid working parts. So we could not do the work we do in support of communities changing the course of the river on homelessness without local leaders who just bring a vision of the common good, of bring a capacity to see a problem in its entirety, bring a sense of equity and justice. Those local leaders are so critical to firing the imagination of a community to take on a big challenge like ending homelessness. And so, for instance, Herb Virgo in Hartford, that's places that we are really piloting what it's going to take to eliminate inflow into homelessness in 2 zip codes that are among the most challenged, the lowest opportunity neighborhoods in the country when you look at the census tracts and the lack of social mobility and the very high rates of homelessness. There's Herb with, just seeing nothing but assets, as well as, the completely clear-eyed as far as the severity of the challenges, but knitting together, an underfunded and neglected park, the need of young people to feel a sense of purpose and belonging and develop skills, the need for the community to have a healthy food system, opportunities to support other organizations in developing a strong mutual aid culture and network. We couldn't be making headway on figuring out what it will take to eliminate inflow into homelessness without the kind of leadership that someone like Herb not just brings, but inspires in others. And the same is true of Debbie Little, who you profile in the book, who's this remarkable figure who had this, I would call it a really big vision, Paul, which is like, can't the churches of the country actually get past, old ideas of charity to be in relationship with people experiencing homelessness, to start eroding the stigma and the sense of impossibility and separation that has allowed this issue to just languish when the solutions are very, very achievable if people are willing to be in relationship with each other.
Yep. That's a great way to say it. Michael, I worked with you on a project late last year where we were looking at, we're talking to corporate America about racial equity. And you've talked about hanging around people with power and money. Why is that kind of leader in the private sector? I don't mean all of them, but why are some of those particular leaders, why are they going to be so important today and in the years ahead? And how do they have to show up if they're going to be important in the years ahead?
Yeah. I think it goes to some of the systems conversations we've been having. All 3 sectors have contributed to us being in the situation that we're in, and it's going to take all 3 to get us out. And the reality is this: corporate America has a unique skill set that is needed now more than ever. The managers and leaders know how to bend our laws and our regulations to their will. They do it every day. And we need to bend laws and regulations so that we have a strong democracy and we have a strong economy, and that 100 million can thrive. At the same time, we can have thriving and stable markets. And so who better else to go to than the folks who are demonstrating the skill set that is needed now more than ever? And so outside of that amazing people power that you see being manifested every single day in community, we need folks who can speak, who are listened, and when they speak, they are listened to help join this equity movement. And a perfect example is what you see happening right now. You see more than 23 states who are clamping down on voting restrictions that are as worse as in the Reconstruction. And advocates are complaining about it. Community folks are complaining about it. I'm angry about it because it's my grandmother that has to stand in line for 8 hours to vote, regardless of health, et cetera. And the reality is, the only group that can stop that right now, outside of revolution in the streets, which then we prosecute and we shoot and we maim community when they do that, is corporate America. And so corporate America is needed right now to start asserting a standard that says this is how this nation should operate. Core set of values that are born out of what people are simply demanding. Can I just participate in democracy unencumbered? That shouldn't be too big of a lift. Because if we don't do that, then you lose the right to start talking about returns on investment when it comes to your charitable dollars or government dollars. You can't destroy this country on one side of the fence and then have the audacity to use all the fancy language of the day on the other side. When I was younger, my house was a little dysfunctional. My mother would always sing hymns, and she would start humming a hymn. And I used to get angry as a little boy because I wanted her to deal with the hurt. But she was dealing with the hurt. And the older I got, I come to appreciate the steadiness of that hum and what it meant. she was holding her family together and serving community, and never lost sight of who she was in that process. And as I've gotten older in a world that is quite chaotic and disruptive and hurtful, I'm often reminded of the steadiness of her spirit and how she could experience such deep hurt and still love. And for me, someone who is born with more of a fighting and an attacking spirit, I've come to embrace that spirit of hers because it's the only way I can stay in this job. It's the only way I can stay sane, is if I do not let my heart become callous and cold to the world that I get to see every day. And so to me, that example of how to love in the storm and stay steady in it is the resolve that I try to bring to my own work, as imperfect as it might be. That ability to love in service of doing work so that future generations can live in a just and fair society is what she taught me how to do. And I'm so grateful for it now that I have the privilege to be in a role where I get to do this work every day and actually understand the value of what she taught me by just being who she is.
So that is a beautiful and authentic answer. And you can never go wrong with answering your mom. Rosanne, how about for you? Who's an exemplar for you? Who's a role model for you when it comes to generosity mindset?
Well, I'll maybe highlight someone who has just had an enormous impact on my life. Among many mentors I've been fortunate to have, Jill Kerr Conway, who passed away 2.5 years ago, was the first woman president of Smith College, among other noteworthy accomplishments, an extraordinary and celebrated writer. But she embodied many of the characteristics that you call out, Paul, and I would say cross-sector fluency and complexity, capacity, but generosity as well. She was someone who, talk about embodying a find a way, kind of orientation to life and comfort with risk. But I think, for generations of people she encountered, just someone who just took such interest in their ideas and was so nurturing, but also tough as nails and, challenging with respect to how are you going to put it all together? But she was a corporate leader, an academic leader, a leader at foundations, was our founding board chair, just really embodied this capacity to hold many things together and to find the points of connection and to really propel people into their kind of authentic selves.
Thank you for listening to the Rebuilders Podcast. For more information, resources, and episodes, visit paulshoemaker.org. That's paulshoemaker.org.